Om Sahana Vavatu Sahano Bhunaktu Sahaviryam Karavavahai Tejasvinavaditamastu Mavidvishavahai. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. May the Divine Being look over us lovingly as a mother and father. May the Divine Being support and nourish us as a mother and father. May we have the strength and skill to study together the art of spirituality. May no misunderstandings arise amongst us. Om, peace, peace, peace be unto us and to all beloved beings everywhere. So, good morning. Good morning.
Namaste, Brother Shankara. Good morning, everybody.
Namaste, namaste. So, we're talking this morning about selflessness. The announcements you can find on the Facebook page, on the website, in the newsletter. No need to take up much time with that. Suffice it to say that for the time being, we're not meeting face to face, only by Zoom. So this morning's topic is selflessness. Selflessness. Finding reverence, abandoning selfishness, sinking into silence, setting aside the mirror. This month, we are discussing those 4 steps in spiritual practice and how they integrate. Last week we looked closely at reverence. This week, we take up selflessness. Before we begin, are there any questions or comments that are still hanging out there from what we've been discussing this month? Anything at all about these 4 steps? Finding reverence, abandoning selfishness, sinking into silence, and setting aside the mirror. Anything at all from anyone?
Setting aside the what?
Say it again.
Setting aside the what?
Mirror.
Mirror. Okay.
The mirror of the mind, yes.
Mirror of the mind, okay.
Right. Setting aside the mirror. We'll get to that as we move along. Not today, but so being, creating, doing, sharing, the joys of these are why we're here. When you're truly tired of this, just sign off and head for home. Being, creating, doing, sharing, the joys of these are why we're here. When you're truly tired of this, just sign off and head for home. Home, of course, is our eternal abode, our being beyond the relative world being. So this is from the Gospel of Sri Ramakrishna. It's Friday, September 19th, 1884. M. and Mahendra Mukherjee are with the master in his room at Dakshineshwar. Mahendra, why does one slip from the path of yoga? Master, while thinking of God, the aspirant may feel a craving for material enjoyment. It is this craving that makes him slip from the path. In his next life, and this is virtually a quote from Krishna in the Gita, in his next life, he in his next life, he will be born with the spiritual tendencies that he failed to translate into action in his present life. Now, the key word here is translate into action. We have this relative world existence. We have our eternal existence. It is this translating of our spiritual tendencies and our spiritual aspirations into action that elude us sometimes. So the master says, while thinking of God, the aspirant may feel a craving for material enjoyment. It is this craving that makes him slip from the path. In his next life, he will be born with spiritual tendencies that he failed to translate into action in his present life. And our gathering here this morning is evidence of that. We are all studying together the art of spirituality because we have now begun to translate those tendencies into action in this life, in the present, in this life. Mahendra, then what is the way? Master, no salvation is possible for a man as no salvation is possible for a man as long as he has desire, as long as he hankers for worldly things. Therefore, fulfill all your desires regarding God. Fulfill all your desires fulfill all your desires regarding food, clothes, and sex. Smiling. What do you say about the last? Legitimate or illegitimate? M. and Mahendra laugh. So the master is saying that false piety, pretending to want spiritual life when you're still in the grip of cravings for sensual and material existence, is fruitless. No salvation is possible, he says. So before we go on, is there any question about anything or any comment from your own wisdom or experience to be made about what has been said so far? This is very fundamental to this business of becoming selfless, as we'll see. You cannot become selfless as long as you are self-centered. Is it wrong to be self-centered? No, it's just simply limited. Your yearning for spiritual growth is a yearning for less limitation, more freedom, more true happiness, rather than the happiness of the material. So, any comments or questions?
Yes.
Yes, dear.
Um, it occurs to me that so many people are raised to, you can call them cravings, and they are because they're biologically linked, but a lot of people are raised to engage in the material world and to want that, whether they really want it or not. So many people, their parents or their family or their culture or their church or their, whatever, want them, push them to compete for worldly things. And then they become caught up in it. And I think, there are people for whom, they go after it, but it's not satisfying, but they're never told they have a choice. And they may be 90 years old before it occurs to them, or
Well, that you're so right. And that's what draws people to such a gathering as this morning.
Mhm.
There's that sense there must be something more than this. I keep repeating these same material enjoyments, these same sensual pleasures, and yet I don't derive any real lasting joy from them. But something in me knows that there is lasting joy. How to find it? So thank you, Cindy. Absolutely right.
Brother Shankara,
Yes, please.
This is Haima.
Yes,
I totally agree with Cindy. I just want to add something. Without karma yoga, like not expecting anything in return for what we do, selflessness is not possible, I think. What do you think?
Well, this is the idea that will be developed. Yes, this is the idea that will be developed this morning.
Yes.
So thank you, Haima. Yes.
Sure. Thank you, Brother Shankara.
Anything else from anyone?
And was that Ramakrishna that said about the cravings for food, clothes, and sex? Was that Ramakrishna's?
That's what he said.
Can you repeat that entire sentence that ended with that? I mean, he says, what do you think about that?
I got you. I'm just scrolling back. So Mahindra asks, so what is the way?
What is the way? Okay.
And the master says, no salvation is possible for a man as long as he has desire, as long as he hankers for worldly things. Now, these are very plain words. The master was very plain spoken. And he gets specific. Now he gets specific. Therefore, fulfill all your desires regarding food, clothes, and sex. Smiling. What do you say about the last one? Legitimate or illegitimate? M and Mahindra laugh. They're both married men. They have wives and they enjoy their worldly life. The last that when Sri Ramakrishna says legitimate or illegitimate, he's speaking of the legitimate desires, the kama, that is, so he's saying to them, he's asking them, bluntly, is this a legitimate desire or an illegitimate desire? The last one. And of course, they both, understanding what the master is gesturing toward, laugh. So that get it, Brahmadas?
Yes, I think they laugh because they're a little embarrassed to talk about it. That was the
Well,
impression.
yes, indeed, that too. But it's not just it kind of took them by surprise that the master would be so blunt, I think.
Yes, that too. But I think what he's saying is no salvation is possible while you're still craving these things. But then he says,
If they're in the forefront of your awareness, yes, exactly. So what is the way? And the master says, fulfill the desires, because you've been born in this life with these tendencies towards spiritual life. Fulfill your desires and then go on. Anything else from anyone?
Yeah, Brother Shankara,
Yes, dear.
I think looking back, or when I contemplate on different things, my faith or belief in that whatever you do is carried forward in your next, if you have a next birth, it's strengthened. For example, the anecdote that Shailesh shared with us about those slum children in Pune, and one of them went on to become a monk. And also, either somebody comes into your life, or despite the circumstances, there is this propulsion towards spiritual life.
Yes, this is what the master is saying. And I said, that's why we're here this morning, to honor that impulse and to explore together how to make it a reality for us. Action. Take it into action.
I have something to say on that. I feel, and I guess I believe, that what we're talking about here is walking on the blade, on the edge of a blade, like a razor. It's we're talking about food, which is a necessity for survival in this physical body.
Mm-hmm.
And we're talking about sex, which is necessary in order that we continue to exist on a physical level.
Yes.
And if we eliminate those two things, but before I go there, craving is the word that puts all of this in doubt for me. I think that I don't know if we can participate in these activities but not crave them. To me, seems to be a legitimate way of existing or being. But the minute you put the word craving in there, that kind of changes everything. That places it in front of God.
Yes.
Okay.
That's why the master says no salvation is possible as long as there's craving for these things.
So I think we need to deal with that word craving. If we get that craving word, satisfied within this group, I think it makes it more manageable to deal with. And that if we get it to be more manageable to deal with the craving word out, then we can bring the craving word back. And that will take us to another level with this. But to try to deal with the maximum, that craving makes it maximum. It makes it.
It's a matter of our priorities, Robert, as you've alluded to. It's a matter of our priorities. What comes first? Hmm? And that's why the masters question legitimate or illegitimate. It is what your priorities are that make it legitimate or illegitimate. And this is very much in the teachings about kama, the legitimate desires, fulfilling your legitimate desires. So,
Can you hear me okay?
yes, Tom.
So I agree with Robert, if I understand what he's saying. It's these words like craving, desire, wanting represent all sorts of degrees of desire. Like the intense craving is a problem, but just the desire to get something to eat when you're hungry keeps you alive. Craving for drugs and alcohol can be so intense that it destroys you. Sex can be anywhere from an obsession to just a nice thing that brings couples together. And who knows? Yeah, like in Buddhism, they say the cause of suffering is desire. But I've always wondered just what level of desire are they talking about? What level of desire or craving or whatever? A lot of my desires keep me alive, and I want that to continue. But I'm having trouble putting this into words. But it's like the intense, irrational craving, or the thing where I start eating ice cream, which I don't really need, and I eat more and more and more of it. That's an unhealthy desire. But just to get some healthy food to eat to keep my body alive, that's a healthy desire. I guess that's all I have to say on it.
All very well said, Tom. And each of us discovers for ourselves, each of us discovers for ourselves where these limitations are and how much limitation in the form of desire we're willing to endure. It's that desire to be unlimited, the desire to be free, that pushes us ahead. Anything else from anyone?
Yes, Brother Shankara.
Yes.
In this context, is salvation the same thing as realization, or is that something different?
Salvation is liberation. Realization is that nirvikalpa state of being. We can come to a state of salvation or liberation in which we do not need to take another human body without having realization. That realization is a very high state. It's indescribable. It's almost unmentionable, because what can we say about it? There's no knower there. There's no experiencer there. No one who has tried to describe it ever succeeded, and they all admit their failure to describe it. Even such linguistic magicians as Adi Shankaracharya admits that he isn't able to say what realization is. He says, "My mind fell like a hailstone into the ocean of consciousness and therein dissolved." Oh, those are beautiful words, very poetic words. But can I tell you what they mean? What it means to have the mind dissolve? No, I cannot. So liberation and salvation are equivalent words. Realization is not something we can even aspire to, according to Patanjali. It's something that happens to us. Thank you, Dennis.
Thank you.
Anything else from anyone?
Brother Shankara,
Yes,
Can you hear me?
yes. I can hear, I was able to hear you. Now, if you're saying something, I can't hear you.
Yes, brother. I think you can hear me now.
Yes,
Um,
Niranjana.
yes, brother. Brother, when Sri Ramakrishna says, go fulfill your desires, how should we take it, considering what we learned from Patanjali, who says everything should be in moderation?
Well, Krishna says moderation, Patanjali says moderation. Good sense, common sense tells us moderation. But what is moderation? Moderation, there's no dogma about it. There's no fixed line written in the sand. For each of us, and I think Tom Carr spoke very eloquently to this, that we have our legitimate desires, we have our needs, and then we have addictions. And Sri Krishna also addresses that very strongly. The minute you become addicted and you thwart that addiction, you become angry. The minute you become angry, you lose discrimination. The minute you lose discrimination, you lose the purpose of life. And so, but each of us has to decide for ourselves. This is where, as Robert Ayres pointed out, it is akin to walking a razor's edge. The wonderful thing about walking the razor's edge, it's very difficult, but it's not a very far fall. If we step off the razor's edge, we find that it's only a very short fall to the solid ground beneath that, so to speak, the solid ground of our good sense, our spiritual practice, and so on. So we must not be dogmatic, because the desire for dogmatism is in itself a great limitation. The divine presence, the divine being, is far beyond any of our abilities to limit it through language or thoughts. Speech cannot hold thee nor mind, yet without thee we think not nor speak. Thank you, Niranjana. That's a very pertinent question. Anything else?
Shankara?
Yes, dear.
Excuse me, could you please tell us again where in the gospel that is, or what day?
Friday, September the 19th, 1884. It's the chapter on the master going to the Star Theater. But the chapter doesn't begin there. It begins in his room at Dakshineshwar.
Okay, thank you so much.
Mm-hmm. All right. As a minister said recently, you have dual citizenship in this relative world and in the eternal. I thought that was very aptly put. We have dual citizenship. We belong here, and potentially, as Vivekananda says, we can manifest the divinity that is also within. So we have this dual citizenship in the relative world and in the eternal. To begin your journey home, you need to take leave of your lower self in the same sense you do when you are said to die. Die before you die, says the Koran. Now, we're going to go into this. To become selfless, to become more and more selfless, is to become more and more dead to the attractions of this world. So I'm going to read that again. You have dual citizenship in the relative world and the eternal. To begin your journey home to that eternal abode, you need to take leave of your lower self in the same sense you do when you are said to die. The body dies, of course. The action and experience suit dies. You don't die. But it's easy to understand what is meant by this statement in the Koran: die before you die, so that you have given up the things of this world before you're forced to do it by the hand of death. If you are interested in this idea, you might well ask, how? This is from the Bhagavad Gita, chapter 6, the Yoga of Meditation. Let him who would climb in meditation to the heights of the highest union with Brahman take for his path the yoga of action. Then, when he nears that height of oneness, his acts will fall from him. His path will be tranquil. For when a man loses attachment to sense objects and to action, when he renounces lustful anxiety and anxious lust, then he is said to have climbed to the height of union with Brahman. Now, that height of union with Brahman can be thought of as nirvikalpa samadhi, but because of its references to action and non-attachment to the things of sense objects and so on, I think we're also talking about savikalpa samadhi, the lower samadhi. These are Sri Krishna's words to his disciple Arjuna. He goes on to explain why the principles, he goes on to explain why the principles and practices of karma yoga, the yoga of action, are a way to achieve meditation, which is a reliable gateway home, union with Brahman. We'll take up the rest of this lesson this morning. So before we go on, anything that needs to be settled about where we are and where we're headed? So I'm going to read that from Krishna again, because this is about as definitive as it gets. Excuse me, I'm scrolling backwards here. This is from Bhagavad Gita, chapter 6, the Yoga of Meditation. Let him who would climb in meditation to heights of the highest union with Brahman take for his path the yoga of action. Then, when he nears that height of oneness, his acts will fall from him. His path will be tranquil. For when a man loses attachment to sense objects and to action, when he renounces lustful anxiety and anxious lust, then he is said to have climbed to the height of union with Brahman. These are Sri Krishna's words to his disciple Arjuna. He goes on to explain why the principles and practices of karma yoga, the yoga of action, are a way to achieve meditation, which is a reliable gateway home to union with Brahman. we'll take up the rest of this lesson this morning. Once again, anything to add or ask?
The passage when he renounces lustful anxiety and anxious lust, which chapter and verse from Gita is that?
That's chapter 6, and I don't have the verse, but it's very early in chapter 6, which is titled The Yoga of Meditation. But he says, to achieve meditation, you must practice karma yoga. He's saying that. We need to. And I'll go on to explain what I believe he means. But any other comments or questions? As Krishna explains in the chapter on karma yoga, what it means to practice karma yoga as he defines it, and has been defined by all of the great teachers in one way or another. You live sacramentally. That is, you offer everything, every act, every thought, every belief. So starting with thoughts, translating those into speech and concepts and so on, and ultimately into action. All of those categories. To live sacramentally is to make them all sacraments. What is sacraments? Sacraments is what you offer to the Lord. So you live sacramentally. Now, this is a daily practice. It is an hourly practice. It is a moment-by-moment practice. It's something that becomes habitual by repetition. You start the day, this day is offered to thee, Lord. And however you conceive of the Lord, this day and everything it contains is offered to thee. And then, as you take food, as you prepare food and you take food, you offer that food. As you do all of these other things that Sri Ramakrishna mentioned, you offer those. Everything is offered as an act of worship. This is living sacramentally. Is there any concern about what that means? Anything from your own wisdom or experience about what that means? Or any question that you'd like to ask about what that means?
Yes, Brother Shankara.
Yes, Aaron.
I think for me, like, I am pretty good about like staying on top of like offering my day at the beginning of the day. However, I get like super busy with work and I don't really think so much about like that I'm doing karma yoga or that I'm doing it for Sri Ramakrishna. I'm just thinking like about my work. So am I still like doing karma yoga even though I'm like,
well, it's better to bring it into the forefront of your awareness simply because it becomes more intentional. And the more intentional we are, the more successful we will be at creating this deep habit of offering everything. But if you start your day and say that, and then say to the Lord, Lord, I offer my mistakes too. I offer those thoughtless moments. I offer it all to thee. Remembering that what Sri Krishna says is that underneath it all is the delusion that I am the doer, you are the doer. No, the Lord alone is the doer. So as it says in one of the poems, in Love Poems from God, I made you, I made those actions, and everything I make is perfect. Now that is very hard to grasp. And Sri Ramakrishna says, if you wish to resolve those paradoxes and those questions and those concerns, come into the neighborhood of God and everything will resolve itself for you. How to come into the neighborhood of God? Prayer, prayer, prayer. We pray. Seek ye first the kingdom of God, and all else shall be added unto you, all knowledge and all righteousness. Krishna says the same thing. Turn to me in utter devotion. By the devotion means offering everything to him. Holiness itself shall transform. So, of course, we get busy and the active offering slips away. But as soon as we can, recover it. Anything else? Thank you for that, Aaron. That was right on the money.
Yeah, I'll just quickly say one more thing. Like something
Yes.
that helps me is I will have a picture of like Sri Ramakrishna at my desk while I'm working. So that helps out a lot.
Oh, yes. These images are, Holy Mother said, we have no idea how fortunate we are that in this time, in this age, we actually have a picture of the divine being. If we believe this is true, we have a picture of the divine being present in the picture. So fortunate are we. Anything else? Thank you, Aaron.
Can you hear me?
Yes, Tom.
Oh, I'm sorry. I interrupted Robert. Go ahead.
That's all right.
Okay,
Go
I'll be brief. But okay, so the closest thing that I ever did to this was mindfulness, in which I tried to be mindful of everything that was happening while I was working.
Mm-hmm.
And I noticed I could do it pretty regularly and pretty easily with physical tasks like washing the dishes, doing yard work, anything that was a physical task. But I was never able to do it with a mental task like writing software. I just couldn't do it. The two things didn't go together. It's like with the mental task, I was totally focused on the mental task, and I couldn't do the mindfulness. So that's just me. There's probably somebody out there that could do it, but I was never able to do it.
Well,
Thanks.
Tom, just the fact that you're aware of when you were able to do it and when you weren't is a very high state of awareness indeed. And so that's to be treasured. And yes, our left mind is very difficult, and the things of the left mind are very difficult to keep under control. It has its own ways, very ancient ways. They're made up of all these mental impressions, we're told. And so when we get immersed in those, very hard to remember. Which is why, if it works for you, having a picture, as Aaron pointed out, is a useful thing. But if you're not aligned that way, it's not compulsory. None of this is compulsory. Anything else from anyone? Robert, you had something.
Yes, I have a question from How to Know God.
Mhm.
36. Concentration can be attained by fixing the mind on the inner light, which is beyond suffering, beyond sorrow. My question is can you describe what is meant by beyond suffering in that context? Beyond sorrow, rather.
Was it just last week? I think it was just last week. We did a guided meditation in which there was the guidance to find and be enveloped in that inner light. That inner light is the light of consciousness itself, which, if we grasp that, it's primary, it is not plural, and it is not local. Therefore, by definition, it is beyond any limitation. Sorrow is a limitation. It's a limitation we all experience. The refuge, as is being pointed out in that translation and commentary by Swami Prabhavananda. The inner light is the refuge that is beyond sorrow. Long practice is required, and it may not come as an inner light for some of us. It may come as sound. It may come as a visualization of some divine being or holy figure. So again, there's no limitation. You are infinite beings. Each one of you is infinite and unique. So at a certain point, you find your own meaning for these terms like inner light or inner experience. But that's what the Swami is gesturing toward. That the light of pure consciousness, that inner light, is beyond all limitation and therefore, by definition, beyond the limitation of sorrow. Does that get it, Robert?
Yes, that gets it.
Okay. Anything else?
Brother Shankara, this is Fred.
Yes, Fred.
Good morning, everybody.
Morning.
Greetings. Could you just say a little more about how you said none of this is compulsory?
Well, we, as the divine being, invented and invited ourselves into this relative reality. And that's why I said in that short poem in the beginning, being, creating, doing, sharing, the joys of these is why we're here. When you are truly tired of this, just sign off and head for home. No compulsion, your priorities. What is it that you still wish to involve yourself with? And this is why Sri Ramakrishna was so explicit with Mahendra and M. He was very explicit and very clear. But he said, if liberation or salvation is what you want, then you'll go beyond these. You'll fulfill them and then go beyond them. So there's no compulsion. we as the divine being, it's just so absolutely clear. This is the creation of the divine being. Each one of us is a unique and infinite aspect of the divine being that created this in order to do it. And this is why Sri Krishna speaks in chapter 17, the field and the knower. He's very explicit about what's the field of action and what is the knower. Saguna Atman. Atman with attributes. Knowing things is an experience. So that's within the realm of time, space, and causation. So no compulsion. Do we miss the boat if we don't do these spiritual things? There's another boat. That's what Sri Ramakrishna says. And clearly, each one of us who's here this morning is here because we didn't take the boat all the way to the other shore the last time. And we are now, by our own impulse, by our own priorities, spending time together on a Sunday morning to further grasp and make real these concepts, these teachings. What does it mean to make them real? Bring them into action. Thank you, Fred. Anything else?
Thank you, brother.
You're more than welcome.
Brother Shankara, this is Haima. I have a comment about what you said to Tom.
Yes.
Like you said, yes, first step, realizing that I'm not able to practice mindfulness is the number one step. Once we start doing the meditation, as it ripens our meditation, and then ego subsides and anger dissipates, and then I think mindfulness starts coming into us. We start dropping all the previous stuff. We live in the moment from that time on. And that's what my experience has been.
Well, that's excellent. But it doesn't contradict at all what Tom said.
Yes, definitely. Not at all contradicting. It will happen. That is the first step. He already realized it. That is the biggest step, actually. We don't realize that often. Often we don't realize it. And as it happens slowly with meditation, even though it will have relapses every now and then. Once you find the divinity within yourself, that is the kingdom of God within ourselves, I think the mindfulness slowly comes to us. That's what my feeling is. I just want
Excellent.
Thank you, brother.
Just as long as we don't judge others for whom that's not a reality.
We accept every situation as it is. That is the way
it's like Fred Rogers said, I like you just the way you are.
The way you are. Exactly. Thank you so much. Just wanted to make
Thank you, Haima.
Hey, I wanted to say along those lines, and I've heard this a lot over the years in classes and talks here, the importance of making your spiritual life and practice your own.
Mm-hmm.
Learning, reading, discussing, but then it's very important that you make it your own and not try to get what other people say you should get or
Amen.
This is really important. And that takes time. So, the ultimate spiritual goal is different for each of us.
Exactly. We are infinite, unique beings. Swami Vivekananda gave a talk in London. It was one of the few things that was published during his lifetime. It was published by his British and then American disciples. And the title of the talk was Each Man, of course, he meant each human being, each man his own sect, S-E-C-T. Ultimately, we must come to these understandings ourselves. We learn the principles and practices, and then how do they apply to me? What do I really want? And so, two other ways of saying this that I told you, Krishna said, live sacramentally. There's this wonderful comment by Swami Sridharananda. Divinize your life. Make everything in your life, think of it somehow, find some way to think of it as an expression of, an enjoyment of, divinize it. Just cover it with the divine. And Swami Prabhavananda had his own version of this, and he said, give everything a Godward turn. Give everything a Godward turn. So it's exactly the same message. Divinize your life, give everything a Godward turn. If we take seriously the words omnipresent, omniscient, omnipotent, or we take the Sanskrit term Satchidananda, absolute knowledge, absolute existence, absolute love and bliss, if we take those things literally and get our minds around omnipresence, omnipotence, omniscience, there's no room for anything else but the divine. It's only our ignorance and misunderstanding that causes us to see it otherwise. Now, that's not dogma. You don't have to buy that. None of it. But if you're seeking to be beyond limitation and beyond sorrow and have true, lasting happiness, then these ideas deserve to be taken seriously. Any final thoughts from anyone?
Brother Shankara,
Yes, dear.
were you going to, or could you describe a little bit more about lustful anxiety and anxious lust, if I'm saying that right? What
Yes,
is the
yes.
difference
Well,
between the two
it's a
terms?
poetic turn of phrase by Sri Krishna. The minute we are anxious, the minute our minds are, the minute we're self-absorbed, we're anxious about things, anxious about the results, anxious about how good am I, anxious, anxious. So there's lustful anxiety and anxious lust. It's just a beautiful turn of phrase by Sri Krishna saying, but what's the common word?
Anxious.
Anxious, yes.
Yeah, I actually found
Distracted.
that in the Gita. It says, when a man loses attachment to sense objects and to action, when he renounces lustful anxiety and anxious lust, then he is said to have climbed the height of union with Brahman.
Yes.
And I think what he's getting at is renounces. We need to renounce that anxious lust.
Yes, but renouncing only comes through understanding. We can't pretend to renounce. That's why Sri Ramakrishna's quote that started all this was there. There's just no sense being falsely pious. Krishna addresses it in the Gita elsewhere too. He says, somebody who renounces the actions themselves, but retains the cravings can only be called a hypocrite. And, we know how far hypocrisy gets us. So thank you, Ramadas. Anything else from anyone?
And how do you renounce those cravings?
Well, you come to understand the futility of them.
Right.
That they are a hamster wheel. You run on the hamster wheel. No progress. Lots of activity, no
That
progress.
is true.
It's only through understanding. And this is why Sri Krishna says, take the yoga of action. You will, in attempting to live according to his instructions, to live sacramentally, you begin to understand deeply what's important and what's not to you. Of course, there's general guidelines, principles, and practices, not dogmas. Anything else, dears? All right. Let there be peace in outer space. Let there be peace in the sky, on the earth, and in the waters. Let there be peace in the herbs, the plants, and the trees. May the gods be peaceful. May the whole universe be pervaded by peace. Let that infinite universal peace prevail throughout my being. Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. Peace, peace, peace be unto us and to all beings everywhere. Jai Shri Guru Maharaj Ji Ki Jai, Durga, Durga, Durga. May you be safe. May you be healthy. May you be cheerful. May you have peace of mind. Go forward in the loving and protective embrace of the Divine Being as our Mother and Father. That'll do it for today.
Thank you, Brother Shankara. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, brother. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks so
Thank you.
much.
Okay. Sayonara.
Thank you.